Welcome to Inspire Campfire, a podcast where ordinary people tell their stories of extraordinary adventure. These are campfire stories meant to inspire the rest of us to light the fire within, get outside, follow our dreams, and return to tell our own stories. Ready? Let's strike the match.
Welcome to the show. I'm your host, Scott Wurzbacher. Today, we are going to talk about how service leads to fulfillment through adventure, of course. I've always heard how the key to meaning and purpose in life is service, but sometimes that's hard to grasp and even harder to fully live. Today's guest is going to help us break it down and show us the way forward through stories of his truly extraordinary stories of service and adventure. Nick Beazley is our guest, and he's a lifelong learner, competitor, and partner to those who are lucky enough to encounter him. Born and raised in Roanoke, Virginia, Nick has a BA from Hampden-Sydney College and an MBA from Wake Forest University. He's experienced many careers, including Assistant Dean of Admissions at Hampden-Sydney College, Senior Field Director for Rivers of the World, Infantry Officer and Special Operations Officer with the U.S. Army. Most recently, he's worked in sales and service management positions in the equipment industry. And these opportunities have taken Nick to Belize, Brazil, Guatemala, Iraq, and Afghanistan, plus many locations throughout the U.S. He is eager to note that he is happily married to his wife, Kitty, and they live with their two daughters in Columbia, South Carolina. So Nick describes himself this way: whether it was my leading exploratory trips into the jungles of Belize for a nonprofit organization after college, deploying to active combat zones with the Army, or learning how to support highly technical fields in the private sector, throughout my professional careers, I have consistently challenged myself to continuously learn, compete at the highest levels, and partner with those around me. In my first call with Nick, I was struck by the way he used a spirit of service to connect with people in a way that has expanded his own awareness, resulting in a more rich experience of life. And I'm so excited for him to share this formula with us today, so we can all share in the deep levels of fulfillment that he's been able to garner. Nick, welcome to the campfire.
All right, man. Thanks, Scott. I'm glad to be here.
Oh, man, I'm so excited. I was just so inspired by that first conversation. And I think what we're getting ready to talk about here, I think we should just start with adventure. And maybe you could share a little bit about who Nick Beazley is and how you developed that early spirit of adventure.
I'd like to say I've always been a rambunctious child, but I was the second son who watched my brother make plenty of mistakes. So I sort of grew up kind of a quiet, reserved, introverted kid. But really, I think when going to Hampden-Sydney College after high school, really gave me a lot of leadership experience, a lot of exposure to things around the world, but also just within myself to realize that I was a leader. I was somebody that could do more than I thought initially, and really that helped me sort of fan the flames of that adventurous spirit to try to get out and do things, help people, and really, gosh, it's been about 20 some odd years at this point, but really developed me into who I am today.
Yeah. So what were some of these early experiences that you had that really triggered it for you?
I think, again, freshman year is always an interesting thing. You kind of float through. You kind of figure out like, oh, I can wake up when I want to wake up, go to bed when I want to go to bed. But I think the first time I really realized I was on my own, it might have been driving to Alaska and living up there for a summer, but that's another story. But really, the formative one was after my sophomore year. I performed in the Edinburgh Fringe Festival over in Edinburgh, Scotland. And I was a history fine arts major, which was just a way to make being a theater major sound like it was a real major. But I performed over there, and going over to Edinburgh Fringe Festival for 2 weeks and performing was the first time I'd ever left the country, first time I'd ever really traveled. Is the first time I ever drank hot tea before. So it was a learning experience. But the professor that took us over there, his advice really resounded with me and stuck with me for a long time, which was take advantage of this opportunity, enjoy your time. No one else is going to do it for you. And that was, it was kind of, you feel like you're abandoned on an island where like no one's going to make sure you have fun in Edinburgh, Scotland. No one's going to keep you from just eating McDonald's every day. No one's going to keep you from just sort of being your own reserved self. So you've got to go out and do your own thing. And that sort of guided me through that whole experience of going and eating local foods, going and meeting the local people, getting a chance to get out there and realize that I'm the one that's in charge of everything I want to do. If I want to do something, I need to raise my hand, volunteer, and go do it. I can't wait for the ghost in the machine to come pluck me up and go have fun with what I was going to do. So that trip to Edinburgh and performing over there and going international where everyone spoke English, despite what they say about the Scottish sometimes. So it was an easier sort of dipping my toe into the world where I had to take advantage of my surroundings and the people I was with.
Yeah. Okay. That one's worth repeating. I think it was take your time, enjoy yourself, because nobody's going to do it for you.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And what's cool, like we were talking, we've talked a couple of times, and it wasn't until just a few minutes ago that you shared that one with me. And I'm just curious, like, that's what's fun about this process is you kind of start revisiting, like, what stories do I want to tell when we're going over this? And, that one sort of hit you, I guess, pretty recently. And I'm curious, kind of like, what was the before, what was Nick like before that? And then that seemed like that was kind of a trigger point for you.
Well, and even another story I'd completely forgotten about as well. I remember the year before that, I had a buddy who said, "Hey, let's drive to Alaska and live up in Alaska for the summer." And I didn't know if I really wanted to, but I figured I'd ask my parents. And I remember them saying, "Yeah, you're 18 going on 19. Do whatever you want. Like you're on your own. Like we're not going to pay for it, but you're like whatever you want to do it." And that was sort of I think the catalyst that made me realize like, oh, I'm a grown up and being sort of on my own. But then with even volunteering to do theater, that was something I'd always wanted to do. I'd always wanted to act or do something different. And being in that environment where I could raise my hand and say, I want to give this a shot. And then doing a summer school course where I got to go to Edinburgh. That was letting me know, hey, the things that you thought were too far away, the things that you couldn't do are actually within perfect grasp. You just have to reach out and do it.
Yeah. Okay. So, I mean, I love this. So you've kind of planted this seed that nobody's gonna enjoy life for me. Right. So, and this is sophomore year in college, and you actually stayed at that college for work after graduation. And so tell us about sort of that transition, and then and then your involvement with Rivers of the World.
Yeah, and so like I said, if anyone's a fan of the podcast, they've probably heard Wes Lawson. Wes is a good friend, and we both went on a service trip to Belize with Rivers of the World. This was like I said, listen to Wes's podcast. It's great.
Episode 55.
There you go. But we went to Belize. Low expectations other than we were expecting an adventure, something different, but sort of carried those themes along with me of like, let's do something, let's connect with people, let's find a way to help out. And so got involved doing service trips with that. I said, I love my parents. I think they helped me with that first trip. The second trip came around, I said, I really want to do this again. And again, they said, well, good luck. Like, pay for it. So I took the money I made as being a resident advisor and working in a health center and paid my way. And that was another sort of realization of, I can do this on my own. I don't need somebody else to pay for it. I can raise the money and I can go enjoy this trip and enjoy that. So we started doing service work where we'd go to Belize and help folks out in that part of the world. And getting involved with Rivers of the World was a really neat organization. And their whole philosophy was go up remote river basins around the world. They started doing work in the Congo. But go up these places where most people don't go. There aren't roads. That's why you take a river, and you meet the people as far up the river as you can get, and you show up and say, hey, what do you need help with? Their saying was, it's your people, it's your village, it's your country, but together we can make it our problem. And for me, that has been a guiding principle really for me going forward is meet people where they are it's a neat adventure. It was a neat adventure to go to Belize. It was neat to go to Brazil, go to other places, but the real challenge was to go there and find out what they needed. I'd often joke with people, when we go on these service trips or mission trips, whatever you want, like in a lot of ways, you want to sort of show up with a Coke machine and in a hamburger and say, hey, here you go, here you got what you needed. And a lot of times, like, no, we don't. That's not what we need. Like,
Yeah.
what we need is like running water, or what we need is sanitation, or what we need is just the building. And so meeting the people and having to actively ask them, what can we help you out with, and not bringing your baggage and your assumptions that you just need direct TV. That's what you need. If you can just watch the World Cup, that's what you need. That's a silly thing. I think we get in trouble doing a lot of times, assuming we know what people need. But Rivers of the World really helped me with that. Helped me sort of get that understanding that meet people where they are, find out how you can help, and together we can make it our problem. And that was a really rewarding part of those two trips I went to Belize with Rivers of the World while I was in college. And then while I worked for the school, I went on several trips again, leading those trips. And then I spent the next 3 years after leaving Hampton-Sydney, working for Rivers of the World as a senior field director, doing a lot of coordination, sending people to other places around the world, but also going and finding work on my own, and actually going in that dugout canoe, crossing the river, going to a remote village and asking that question, what's the biggest problem? How can we help?
Yeah. Nick, I'm curious because you shared with us, you did this trip to Alaska and then you went over to Edinburgh and, you kind of developed the spirit like nobody's going to live life for me. But how do you go from that to this sort of mindset of service and service in these remote locations?
I think part of it is, like, so we think of things as being exotic. You think of Edinburgh as this, it's silly old. I mean, you got castles and other stuff. Like it's such an old country, and so you sort of build up this mythology in your head of what is over there. Same thing with going to the jungle. You build up this sort of the mythos of this is the jungle where panthers are jumping out, and I mean you hear the howler monkeys, which are terrifying. I mean, but you sort of build up in your mind that this is crazy. But when you meet people over there, they're just people like you. Like in Scotland, like I said, they mumble worse than I do, but they've got all the same problems. They want to get through their day and whatnot. When you go to the jungle, like that's just their woods. And growing up in the mountains of Virginia and running around the woods, that was one of the things that struck me going to Belize and going to the jungle, where you could walk across the border. There was no border. It was just jungle, but that's just their woods. What you see as a dogwood tree or an oak tree, they see as a mahogany tree or something, and so they don't see it as special. They look at us and say, how on earth do you live where you live? And so once you start communicating with people, and that's where meeting people where they are is really something that gave me that perspective of, what, like we're all human. We all have our faults. We all have our benefits, but we need to meet each other and learn from each other in that sense. And when you're trying to get that equal back and forth of learning where you are and what's unique about where you are, I think that's really where you get that benefit and that growth. And that's what sort of focused me on that service, where I know I can put myself in an uncomfortable situation and go work with individuals and go be with people around the world and find a way to help them. And that's Hampton-Sydney has a big service component as far as being a college and trying to create graduates that care about service. But that's exactly what Rivers of the World was about. And I knew when I left Hampton-Sydney that everything I wanted to do had to have some service component to it. I had to be serving people and helping people in one way or the other to really feel that fulfillment. And I think being in Belize, being in Edinburgh, being in Alaska, and sort of those experiences are really what fermented that for me.
Yeah, it really captivated me in our first conversation when you kind of brought that to my attention, just this idea of basically like using service to connect with people, because when you show up in a spirit of wanting to help, it's disarming, right? That you're no longer a threat. And I definitely want to get into that because that's a theme throughout pretty much your whole life. I do want to point out, I love that you use the example of like mythology and talking about how like Edinburgh is this old place. Like we build up these stories in our heads about the jungle and about, different places. And I feel like that's where like a lot of the fear and doubt comes in, because we do attach to those, like you said, mythologies, like these stories that we tell ourselves about that place, which is just home to the people that live there. I love that you said that. That was super cool. And I think, on this podcast, a huge theme is helping people to listen to the voice inside that calls them to adventure, and acknowledging that a lot of times we do experience fears and doubts that keep us from crossing the threshold and taking that adventure. And I think that you just hit it, because the mythology and the stories we tell ourselves are a lot of what cause those fears that keep us from doing the things that we want to do.
Yeah, and that's breaking down those barriers is a big thing. I know we'll probably eventually get to the Army, but I remember even going into the Army, my brother joined the Army before me, and I was getting ready to go to basic training, and I knew I was going to have to do a PT test, and so I was like, hey, what's the secret to doing more push-ups or more sit-ups, or like is there a technique I need to do? Like, do I need to wiggle my body the right way? And remember my brother was saying, yeah, the secret to doing more push-ups is do more push-ups. The secret to doing, like, there's no secret. Like, you build up this idea, this wall that, like, okay, this is how there must be some magical thing. It's like, no, you just do it. Like, people have done it before you, they'll do it after you. You just do it.
There's no magic pill. You just get after it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, I love that. Okay, so yeah, I want to get to the Army for sure. Like, could we just talk about maybe a couple stories of your time in Belize, maybe kind of some of the experiences that you've had there?
Yeah, I think one of my fondest memories in Belize was Creek Asarco. It's a little remote village where we'd found a partner that needed help. They didn't have a hard structure building. It was a church/community center, and so they wanted to build a place where they could worship, but also where they could have meetings. Also, they could take refuge from the storm. And so I went down there, met with a guy who rode his bike 25 miles through a jungle road, which is not saying much. And it wasn't a mountain bike. It was one of those like beach cruising bikes, like the one gear bike. But he rode that to meet me. We ended up going to the village, sort of seeing what needed to happen, and we ended up connecting a church with that community. So we actually raised the money for building a church, but we only raised enough money for a wooden structure. And so this is one of the learning experiences for me, where we had this idea, like, okay, we've got the money for lumber, we got the money for gravel, the concrete, the tin or the zinc for the roof. We've got all the earmarks for what we need, but it's not going to be a concrete block church. We can't make that. But that was sort of my mindset going down there. When I met with Andres, our contact down there, and we started going around, he knew people and he knew ways. He knew the government was going to come out there and build a bridge, and so he knew how to get the transportation of all these materials to the jungle, which was one of the biggest costs, for free. And so suddenly that wooden church that they were going to build, this wooden structure, turned into a concrete block, really solid building. And for me, that was recognizing, I had sort of my understandings, my ideas, and my thoughts of what was going to happen. But if I hadn't stepped back and partner with Andres and say, hey, this is our problem. It's not me coming in as a general contractor or project manager and telling you how it's going to work. But for him to, like, he did it. And I remember when we opened that, we had an opening ceremony. Like I said, he stood there next to me. I explained he was the reason we were able to do that. It wasn't the Americans that came and helped. It wasn't the finances. It was them. And that's always the big thing I tried to push in my understanding, but other people that traveled, is that I said, you've got to humbly approach these travel experiences and these individuals, and recognize, like, you might have an idea on how it works, but ultimately on the local level, they know the efficiencies and they could figure that all out. So that trip and that whole experience, going to a remote village in the southern jungles of Belize, and seeing them being able to make something more than what we'd intended, really made me realize, like, it's that partnership and it's working with people that makes the biggest difference.
Yeah. So, okay. So in that partnership, can you talk a little bit about like first encounters with people, right? With the
Yeah.
people of that are, initially not like you, right? Like you show up, you're an outsider, they live there. Like what is that initial encounter like?
You have to just do it. I mean, you really have to just sort of stick your hand out and say, "Hey, my name's Nick." One of the things that I learned from the founder of Rivers of the World, Ben Mathis, was always learn how to say hello, always learn how to say thank you, and just try to learn the language. And if you can figure out how to say hello and thank you or goodbye, that goes really far. And so being a big bumbly white guy walking into a thatch roof hut and saying "Sham Quill," which is Kekchi Mayan for hello or how are you, uh, people's eyes light up a little bit. And so if you try, if you meet people where they are, if you learn how to like kind of kid around and play with them, that's great. The other sort of rule I made up for myself, and especially Belize, most people speak English. In the northern part, they speak Spanish. In the middle, it's kind of a Creole English, hard to understand. And then in the south, it's Mayan. But in school, everybody speaks or learns English. And so I had the rule of the elbow. If you could find a kid that was at least as tall as your elbow, they could translate for you. They
Nice.
had enough schooling that they could speak English. And so if you weren't making any headway with like a local person, an elder, you grab a little kid and you say, "Hey, come here. What is he saying?" And they'd giggle and laugh. And I said, "Candy is the great equalizer." Uh, so
Candy is the great equalizer. I love that.
but yeah, always it's just being curious. That was for me. That was the big thing that helped me going into this Mayan village, where again most of the people spoke Kekchi Mayan, and so they could sort of sit there and stare at you, but you'd make jokes. I remember doing my little thumb trick once, and
Oh yeah.
kids love that. I had some elders come out of the woodwork and like, "What are you doing?" And I'd be like, "Oh no, it's here's the secret. I don't want to freak anybody out." But yeah, just having fun, enjoying that, recognizing that you're not anyone special. You're there to learn from them, and realize that you're getting as much out of this as they're getting out of it as well. And having that humility. Like I said, I jokingly say I'm the most humble person you'll ever meet. I'll defend that to anybody. But walking into a village, it's intimidating because you don't know the people, you don't know the language. But walking in there and saying it's going to be me. Going back to that professor who said, like enjoy your time. No one's going to do it for you. In those situations, like communicate. No one's going to do it for you. Find a way. And I've found through my travels that I can communicate with people if I want to communicate with people. If you really want to communicate, and you're meeting somebody where they are, like you'll find a way. And like I said, you can use big words, you can use little words, you can use body language, but learning how to say hello and thank you in their native tongue is really the best advice I have for people to go into those environments and try to succeed.
Yeah. You said that initial encounter, there is intimidation there. Can you just speak to that real quick and how you get over, like it's there, but you get over it. Like, how do you do it?
Again, you got to recognize, and for me, those first initial trips, I was part of a group,
Yeah.
and then suddenly I was a 22-year-old, 23-year-old flying to the jungles alone. And when it's just you, there is that sort of fight or flight, and you've got to figure out like this is going to happen, and it's intimidating to you. But again, sort of breaking down the mythology of it all, talking to people, understanding the culture. Going to Edinburgh, one of the things that professor made us do was sort of study the culture and study the history. And so suddenly the things become familiar. If you study the plants, study the language a little bit, again, it begins to break down, and your ear will pick things up. You'll become more comfortable, and recognize that you have that ability. That I said I turned into Mr. Nick. People all over Belize were like, "Oh, Mr. Nick, Mr. Nick." Kids would call me Mr. Nick. Other people call me Mr. Nick. And again, I'd never. That was the first time someone had really referred to me in some type of sir environment. But you sort of recognize like you just got to do it. You got it in you, And at this point, there's no safety net. You gotta jump. You gotta make that conversation happen. Otherwise, you're not gonna get the aid or the help for other folks. And that was always a driving force. And I think that helps the service component when you're there for a reason, and you're not just there for vacation. You're not just there for the fun of it. Like you're there to try to help. That's really something that pushed me through those doorways and made the challenges a little less awkward or uncomfortable or insurmountable in that sense.
And I mean, on the other side, they're intimidated too, right?
Yeah, yeah, and that's where humor. People laugh all over the world. One of the little jokes as our kids would teach me Mayan. There are little ants in Belize, and then there are big ants. And the little ants would bite you and the big ants would draw blood, literally would draw blood when they bit you. And if you had big work gloves on, you put them on your finger, and you could hear the mandibles like crunching, trying to get through the leather. But the little ants were called sank, and the big ants were teken. And so the kids were teaching me all the language. And if a kid is being kind of a punk, I could be like sank, like an ant's trying to bite you, or I'd be like teken, and I just sort of, and they're like, oh, okay, like it's they got the humor, they got the playfulness, the same way you play with your kids and whatnot. I mean that was the kids are just as fun. The 3-year-olds are using machetes to cut the grass. That took some getting over, but people are people. People want to make a joke. People want to laugh, and if you can find a way to laugh at your expense, to make a joke. I remember being in Brazil, and to say thank you in Portuguese is obrigado. If it's masculine, I would say as a man, I'd say obrigado. But if you're a woman, you'd say obrigada. You use the feminine form. And so sometimes, like around the kids, I'd say obrigada, and they would just giggle because I was making a mistake. And so that type of sort of just have fun with them, let them enjoy the joke, and that sort of killed the mythology of this big awkward white guy that doesn't speak our language. Being able to sort of say, okay, you're just a goofball like the rest of us. You really are here to connect with us, to eat, like sit at our table, to eat, like not to isolate myself, but really to embrace the culture. That allows you, I think, to get closer to people and actually bridge those gaps.
Yeah, and I can attest because I watched a few videos that were on YouTube, Rivers of the World, and there's one in particular where you're riding a bike across a swinging bridge, and like the bike kind of goes over the side of the rail of the the rail, and you're just like laughing and having fun the whole time. And every single picture and video that I saw that had you in it, you're smiling.
Yeah. Yeah, you got to. Again, no one's going to do it for you. So if you're not having fun, if you're not enjoying what you're doing, even in work, we try to have fun in work. If you're really miserable, like don't do it. But yeah, the swinging bridge incident in Belize was interesting. Machete on my back, and yeah, I encourage you all to go watch that video and watch me almost flip over almost. I did flip over the railing, but I caught myself and didn't fall to my death. But yeah, that was a near brush with death, but it was a lot of fun.
It was hysterical. Yes, I mean near death, but the way that the video was portrayed, it was funny. You guys did a good job of that. It was great. Okay, so Nick, take us. How did we go from Rivers of the World, this experience in Belize, and other experiences like it, to the Army?
It's not a huge leap. It is that same service component.
Yeah.
I was in Chicago, which is a challenge within itself, to go to Belize from Chicago, and having to like not take a winter jacket to Belize made it challenging. And I remember waking up in a hammock, getting on a dugout canoe, riding down a river in the dark, and then going to bed in Chicago, where it was like -10 degrees. So I mean, there are some weird stories that come out of that, but for me, it was the service component. We'd been in an active war for 8 years, 6, 7, 8 years at that point. Again, my brother had joined, and he was telling me all these great stories about camping and whatnot, and how fun the infantry was. But for me, just hearing people sort of be naysayers about people that join the Army. Why do we have people over there? Like, it doesn't make any sense. And for me, the service component was we need good leaders over there. If these troubled individuals are the troubled individuals that we claim they are, or the people would say they are, then why don't we send them better leaders? And so for me, it was that call to service. Like, I knew as a good leader, I knew I had a lot of things I could give people. And at that point, I was a resident head at the University of Chicago, making cookies for kids and picking out movies, which was great. Like, I had a lot of fun. I really enjoyed my time up in the Windy City. But for me, I knew there are soldiers out there in foxholes that needed somebody to sit with them and figure out what their biggest problem was. And when I decided to join, and talking to my brother, I really wanted to enlist and be a sergeant, go that route, the non-commissioned officer route. And he said, we've got a lot of great sergeants. We've got a lot of great team leaders, squad leaders. It's like, well, we need more better officers. That's what we need. And so that was, again, that sort of call to service was I want to go be that officer that sits with the individual, sits with the guys in the foxhole and say, what do you need? Like, again, the rivers of the world, like, this can be our problem. And so I joined in 2008, spent about 15 months at Fort Benning doing basic training, officer candidate school, infantry training, and then went to Iraq. And so that within, I think 15 months of joining, I was in country in Iraq for 10 months. And it really was a lot of that same, like, who's going to do this? When you're the officer, you don't have to do anything. You can be one of those officers that sort of skirts responsibility and just waits to get promoted. But for me, from like the experience, like, I needed to take advantage of that time. I needed to work with the individuals. I wanted to find out how I could serve and how I could not just serve the soldiers, but help the people in that country. At that point, it was not a very kinetic war. And so a lot of the stuff that was happening in Iraq in 2009, 2010 was much more of what I was used to. It was, how do we help with infrastructure? How do we help with security? And so those same skills from the Rivers of the World experience in Brazil and Belize and Guatemala was the same thing, going and working with the local population, saying, what do you need? We could give you Humvees, we give you gasoline. We had a laundry list of things we could provide. But really, it was like my job as a platoon leader was to go out and meet the local population where they were and say, what do you need help with? How can we be a partner in this process? And that was a really rewarding experience. It was a challenging one, but it was rewarding.
Man, I mean, it's the same thing. It's like
Yeah.
the same Nick that went to Belize and said, what do you need? How can we help? You're basically just plugging into the same situation now in Iraq.
Yeah.
And I just wonder, like, we talked about the mythology, right? The mythology of the jungle. Like, can you help us break down the mythology of Iraq?
It's another world. I mean, that is the reality. Like, it's nothing like this part of the world, but the people are the same. Like, the people want to joke, the people want to kid. The people care more about security. We did one of the things we would always do is say, how can we help? And security was one thing they always needed help with, and it was the training. How do we train our soldiers to be better soldiers, to be soldiers like America? But for them, it's like, it was, how do we get girls like better education? How do we get better medicine? And I remember we did a combined medical engagement where we provided the security at the aid station, so people felt safe to come into the aid station and get medical treatment from Iraqi medical professionals as well as American medical professionals. And it wasn't scary, but that was one of the most stressful moments of when the gates were locked, when we said we're going to open at 10 a.m. Like, there was a line of like mothers with kids out really around the block. And I thought they were going to break down the fence because they were so eager to get this help, and that was something that they needed. And so they knew they were going to be able to come and get medical treatment from Americans, from Iraqis, but also it was going to be a safe environment where they didn't have to worry about any of the corruption or anything along those lines. So that was a moment where you realize, like, moms are moms. Like,
Yeah.
Moms are the same people all around the world. Like, they're going to take care of their kids, and they're going to stare down a bull or somebody with a gun if that means their kids are going to be safe. So that was not otherworldly. That sort of was the commonality. But I also remember eating with the Iraqis. I for a while, about 6 weeks, I spent over at sort of a combined base where we lived and worked with the Iraqis, and they would get a big bowl of food, a big bowl of food. It was like rice and chicken and naan, like really, really good food. Like I really enjoy eating. I think if you like eating, that's the best way. Like find that local population
Yeah.
and eat that. But I remember like they were just digging in with their hands. And for me, that was not something we do. I was a big fork or spoon guy.
Yeah.
But it was one of those things like just do it. Like find out how they do it. Like find out the cultural way to do it. Like just embrace it and give it a shot. No one's going to make you do it. And that was a moment where, again, sort of break down that barrier of like, why do I care how people eat or not eat? Like, let's just enjoy the fellowship, enjoy the food, and again, build that relationship where they don't see you as being like, ooh, I don't want to touch that. Like, if you're digging in and they're digging in, then you're shoulder to shoulder with them. They're excited, and they see you more as a partner. That was one of the big lessons for me, was just to be a partner with these folks. Like I said, there's a lot that's different. Dust storms are real. The heat is real. The desert is real. The threat is real. Their propensity towards violence and comfort with it is something that was new to me. But understanding the people at the root of it all really allowed us to have a pretty safe and pretty non-eventful deployment to Iraq because of that. And I don't take credit for that, but that certainly helped the way we were able to meet people where they were and work with them. So they saw us as a partner rather than somebody that was coming in to tell them what they needed to do.
Yeah. So what's kind of sitting with me right now is like in both of these environments, whether it was Belize or Iraq, in both situations, you kind of show up as a stranger and you leave as, you call it a partner, a friend, but there's like connection, right?
Mhm.
There's human to human connection that happens, and you leave with like a level of trust, I guess, that wasn't there before.
Oh yeah, yeah, and that's, you get emails every so often from folks, and when you're in a deployed environment, you typically don't get out too much personal information. But I remember when we were leaving, some of our Iraqi partners are like, do you think you'll ever come back here on vacation? And it's kind of hard when you're holding an assault rifle and you're in full camo that's like, I don't think I'm gonna bring my family here, but for them, like that was like, hey, we look forward to you coming back. And there are some really amazing folks that I worked with there, as well as Belize and around the world that you keep up with, and it's rewarding to see that you achieved a level of partnership that was not expected, or it was not the norm, especially interpreters. I mean, if you just have to scratch the surface of sort of war stories to find some really amazing interpreter stories where folks bring them back to the stateside. But those are the folks that, like, they speak for you. They're your partner. They literally they sleep near you, so that you're always around them. Like they become your closest ally in many ways.
It's so inspiring. And I'll say it at the end too, but just sitting here, I'm feeling gratitude towards you. I just appreciate what you've done for the country and just for the people there. It's really awesome. Can you take us to special operations in Afghanistan?
Yeah, and so that was a second deployment. Like I said, in 4 years of being in the Army, deployed for about 22 months of that. But that was a different war. Iraq was more kissing babies, providing infrastructure. Afghanistan was still much more of a kinetic war. The threat posture and threat violence was a lot higher. But when we were deployed there for a year, we were attached to special operations, and they had a village stability operations program, which for me, when we were first ramping up for our deployment, like, it was rivers of the world in camouflage. It was 100%. We're going to go to a local village. We're gonna find a way to work with this local village. But the first question we need to ask is like what they need. And the big thing that was provided in Afghanistan was security. They needed security and they needed training. So special operations units would go embed within the local population. They'd live with the local population. They'd eat. They'd work with the local population. They'd train them up so they could build that partnership and that connection. Again, exactly what we did in Rivers of the World and Belize, exactly what we were doing in Iraq, but a much more deliberate process where we had about 56 different little units that went out with special operations to work these villages and provide these villages with what they needed. And so that was a long 12 months, but I think that was probably the best program the Army had going, because what it was trying to do is connect the local population up with the state government or provincial government, and make sure that the government was working for themselves, and the whole time partnering with them on a local level. So it was not dependent upon U.S. forces. It was us training the local population, so we eventually could work our way out of a job, and we could walk away from Afghanistan. That's another podcast. But that was, I was overly excited about that deployment because of how much it reminded me of Rivers of the World. And I remember talking to our leaders about, let me help explain sort of best practices, things that we can do better, and sort of the mindset we need to be in, because the infantry in a lot of ways can be a hammer and see the world as a nail. And the challenge with what Rivers of the World did was you've got to see everybody as a person, and you've got to meet them there. You've got to have the hammer if need be, but really you've got to work with them on a local level. So that was 12 months living in a much more hostile environment than Iraq, but rewarding and all the same.
Yeah. It's all the same.
Yeah.
It's the same service. You're doing the same thing. You're showing up. And I love that this, you're asking the question, what do you need? And how can we help in all of these situations? And just to sort of round this out, and then we can, I want to talk about the formula that I talked about in the intro. So you left the Army, and now you're still following your whole life of service. Can you just kind of,
it's, I mean, it is, like I said, I think you put a nail on the head as far as what I've been doing my whole life without me realizing it. But even in a sales environment, the consultative sales, I left the Army, went out to Oklahoma, and started working for a crane company. I knew nothing about the people, the land, or anything out there, but I sort of had my mission. I needed to go sell large contracted engineered lifts in refineries and power plants. And so I started meeting people, and the way I would sell, and the way I go about everything I do is find out what the people need, find out what's going on. And if you have that curiosity, I think the curiosity helps sort of drive you into those doorways and into those offices and into those places where that's what you're asking. You're not. I always joke about the old vacuum cleaner salesman that you'd open the door and they'd throw a pile of dirt on your rug, and then they'd be like, well, let me show you how to clean it up with this new vacuum. And I always hated that idea of sales. Like, for me, if you don't need a vacuum, I don't want to sell you a vacuum. Mm-hmm. But for somebody that needs a vacuum, I want to tell you why my vacuum will help you, and it'll help me, and it'll be mutually beneficial. And so that led me, that approach has been what's led me through the private sector as I've gotten out of the Army. Like I said, selling engineered lifts to refineries. It's what do you need? And I know they need a crane, or I know they need something heavy picked up, but why do you need it? And in a refinery, if they're down for, I mean, they can measure dollars lost by hours of inactivity, and if they know that I'm going to save them a full 10-hour day, that could equal $1.5 million of saved revenue. And so understanding the why, like what do you need and why, like how can we be a partner? And if you can ever partner with people, that just makes them want to work with you more. And I think that sales approach works. And same thing now in a management role. What do the people that work for me need? What do my other managers need from me for them to be successful? And taking that approach has allowed me to do a lot of careers and career paths that I had no family background in. No one other than my brother has ever joined the Army. No one in my family's ever worked for a crane company or an equipment company or a commercial HVAC company. But this sort of background and this willingness to try new things and willingness to enter into uncomfortable conversations with people has allowed me to be successful within my own right and within fields that I really had no idea I would ever get involved with.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So this is so cool, and I want to talk for a minute about fulfillment. And I think I want to connect a couple of chain links that I've kind of picked up in our time today, and in our time in a couple of conversations we had before the podcast. But your mindset always starts with service, and what I'm following in this chain is that mindset of service turns you into a partner, which is ultimately a relationship, right?
Mhm.
And then that relationship, that trusted relationship, sort of breaks down this barrier and allows you to really connect with people, really get to know them, the different cultures, the different places, which essentially expands your awareness of the world,
Mhm.
which ultimately leads to a more fulfilling life. And so I guess my question for you is like, can you that's hypothesis, right? Can you help me like break that down and like, how have these experiences that you've had from Rivers of the World and Belize to the Army to your service career now, like how has that service mentality led you to a life of fulfillment?
It, it's funny. We refer to the service division as the fulfillment division in our work. But as far as being fulfilled, traveling more, understanding how people work around the world has allowed me to understand people better. I think it gives me more patience with people. It allows me to sort of see where they are, or if I don't see where they are, question where they're coming from, and not be so quick to assume again that mythology of what that person wearing that hat or with that sticker on their car, what that means. It's like they might have a different perspective. I wonder what their perspective is. I wonder if I can get in a conversation and find out more about that person so I can understand how things work. And that has helped me understand people better. I still it's a work in progress, but the more individuals you talk to, the more places you've been to, the more you understand the nuances of the world. I think the more you feel fulfilled because the world's less of a mystery. And sometimes that's boring. Again, I remember going to special forces training, and you're waiting for this big person to come out of the sky and say, here's the secret to doing ambushes, or here's the secret to doing this specific tactic. You figure you're in special operations, they're gonna tell you the secret, but it's a lot like my brother teaching me how to do more push-ups. It's used to do more. I used to get better at the technique, and really the secret to special forces or any high level talented person is that they've just done it more, and they've got more reps in. and and the more I engage with people, the more reps I'm getting in as far as understanding how people operate in the world, and how many different perspectives and different ways people operate in the world. And when I can get more reps than anybody else, when I can get more reps just for myself, that just makes me more of an elite person. There's not a mystery. I haven't solved anything, but I've got a lot of experience, and I think that's the secret for me to have that fulfilled life, but also to help people in more ways than I realize, and that's to meet them where they are, to learn how they think and learn how they operate in the world.
Well, I also feel like I want to just point out that like I see an intense curiosity in you too. And I feel like that curiosity is a driver for all of this. This whole like showing up and saying, what do you need? It's because you're curious and you want to learn.
Yeah, yeah. You've got to want to do something different. Even if you're going to the beach, just go to a local dive. Find like even if that's all you can do is like you're going to a new place, find the local establishment. Don't We're not going to shame McDonald's for being so well traveled around the world, but don't eat at McDonald's in Edinburgh. Don't go to the beach and get Wendy's. Like don't go to IHOP. Find a local dive, but be curious in that sense, and that's something I've always tried to do. Like I said, trying to sort of analyze the world one bit of data at a time. You just need more data to better understand it. So that's I think you're absolutely right. I'm very curious about how the world works and how I can fit into it.
Yeah, that's great. I mentioned again in the intro, but I'm somebody that studies personal growth. I read lots of books, and there's all kinds of quotes you can find on Google about how the meaning and purpose of life is service. And
Mhm.
sometimes it is kind of hard to wrap your head around that, but to just spend time with you and hear your stories, and it helps like really bring the experience together. And I hope that those listening have been able to feel that through your stories as well. So it's just, as we kind of wrap up here, I'm just curious what advice you have for people that are intrigued by this sort of curiosity that you have, this voice inside that calls to adventure, but maybe they experience their own sort of fears and doubts. Maybe they have their own mythologies. Like, what advice would you have for people that want to get after it and start experiencing more adventure?
And just do it. Not to steal from Nike, but
Yep.
you've just got to raise your hand, volunteer. I was out of shape and 27 years old when I joined I joined the Army and went to basic training. I was in my 30s when I went to the Q course for special operations, and so you've got to raise your hand. You got to recognize that you are a leader, you are a person. You're going to experience new things, and no one's going to do it for you. Like I said, take advantage of the fact that you're the only one that's going to make you enjoy this event or this activity or challenge yourself. I said no. If you're going to wait for somebody to come in and do it for you, you're going to be waiting your whole life. So take advantage of whatever you can. Get an MBA when you're 41. Go back to school. Like I said, just don't give up. Be as young in your mind as you want to be.
That may be the title of this episode. No one's going to do it for you. I love it. All right. So, you've lived this epic life. You've had all these awesome experiences all over the world. And eventually Hollywood's going to pick up on this, Nick, and they're going to make a movie about you. And so when they do, I want to know who the actor is going to be that's going to play you in your movie.
Probably Matt Damon.
Yes.
I've been told I look like Peyton Manning, but I don't think his bona fides are quite the Matt Damon. Matt's played a goofy guy that bought a zoo. He's played a soldier, Jason Bourne, whatever grandiose person.
That's true. He can do it. I like that. That's a good one. I'm into that. I'm going to watch that. And what's the movie going to be called?
Probably Beazley with a Z. That was in basic training. Ironically, I think I had a distant cousin in the bunk next to me, which was Beazley with an S. And so all through basic training, it was Beazley with a Z or Beazley with an S. Like that was my name in basic training. So if for anything, just so people know how to spell Beazley the right or wrong way, however you want to say it.
Beazley with a Z. I love it. Well, Nick, thank you so much for spending time with me today. This was hugely inspiring. It's a great way to kind of kick off the new year. And I just really appreciate you. Once again, thank you for your service to our country. And for those listening, I hope that you've been inspired today as much as I have. I hope Nick's story has encouraged you to listen to the voice inside that calls you to adventure, because we want to hear your story next. If you have a story to tell or you need a nudge to create one, please send me an email. We'd also appreciate it if you'd help us spread the word by leaving a review and sharing or tagging Inspire Campfire in your social media. And until next time, I want to encourage you to get outside. Thank you for listening. Nick, thank you so much for being here.
Scott, thank you so much. Really appreciate it.